to their range, they really, really need to pile up on food before they go into their burrow permanently until spring. So palmetto berries is the #1 food that they eat because it's so nutrient dense. So come spring, we'll start seeing palmetto berries, and they're scattered all over the place. So they really need to bulk up on food so that way they don't lose much body weight during hibernation. Their status and protection. In 2007, Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, it's shortened for FWC, so people just usually call them Fish and Wildlife. Now that's different than the service. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is the federal listing. They are not federally listed. So, but they were uplisted from species of special concern to threatened. Now in 2012, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, the federal agency, did place the gopher tortoise on the candidate list. They did a study and decided that it warranted being on the Endangered Species Act. So it was warranted being covered. However, there's not the finances, funds, or resources to actually add them to the list, because as soon as they get added to the list, so much money has to be allocated to their habitat management plans and to their management plan in general in order for them to do what they do under that act. So they are on the candidate species right now, but they could be uplisted to federal status at any time if the federal government deems it necessary. Gopher tortoises are threatened throughout the range. That is in their entire range, and they're threatened throughout the entirety of it. Human impacts on tortoise populations. So we were talking about roads. Typically, they are protected. So you can't just take them out of the wild. You don't want to pick them up and move them anywhere else. But if they are in the road, super important that you're safe. don't get yourself killed. But get the tortoise and put it in the direction that they're going. They're very, very primal. They eat, they sleep, they have babies, and that's pretty much it. They know what they're doing, and they're doing it for a purpose. So if they're crossing the road, they're either going to eat or going to breed or coming back home. So you always want to put them in that direction.
I had to explain it to somebody. I said, if you were on an escalator and we took you off and put you at the bottom, are you going to get back on the escalator? And they're like, yeah. And I went, well, hello.
Exactly. That's a perfect metaphor. Yeah, and they know why they're going there. So just help them. Now, abuse, including eaten as a food source. There is a lot of that still going on in Florida, unfortunately. Panhandle has been decimated by people eating tortoises. I don't know if y'all have ever seen the stories about it, but there's lots of, if you Google, tortoise mortality and, people eating them as a food source, you'll see pictures, old school pictures of mounds the size of this room with just gopher tortoise shells. It's horrendous. So they've got great habitat up there, and that's going to segue into another section of what we're doing, but they don't have the tortoises they should up there because they have been eaten out of that area. I live on a conservation area, 240 acres in Seminole County as a caretaker, and still every single year we catch someone trying to walk off the property of gopher tortoises. So, very kind, even though I want to punch them in the face. But I'm nice.
I will.
And
I'll do it.
We call the police. I used to work for the sheriff's office, so we call deputy out there, and then we get FWC out there, they get arrested, we put the tortoises back, and we're good to go. But so it is still something that happens every day. If you see something, say something. You can't say it enough, okay? Important to call the wildlife hotline because they'll get investigated. If there's nothing wrong, then you go about your business. If not, you just save that tortoise's life and you stop whoever it was from possibly harming that tortoise. It may be stopping them from ever doing it again because they don't want to be arrested again. So keeping them illegally as pets. This happened with the torture case. Are you all familiar with the torture case in Orange Park?
With the two girls that burnt the one?
The two, yeah. So they took a tortoise out of the wild to keep as a pet, and then they tortured it. But a lot of people take the animals out of the wild as pets because they think they're turtles, so they put them in water. They think that they can take them out of the wild, and then they just raise them as pets. Sometimes they love them. Sometimes it's not a neglect issue or they want to harm them. But as you saw with the diversity of their forage, 37 different grasses, hundreds of species of diverse ground cover. You cannot simulate that in an artificial diet. I don't necessarily agree with pet trade tortoises, but it's out there. So there's a reason that there's pet trade tortoises and wild tortoises. Tortoises should never be taken out of the wild. Every time we get a call on one and we use one of our rehab partners, the tortoises are pyramided and they're malnourished, their shells are soft, their beaks are overgrown every single time because it is very, very, very difficult to take a tortoise out of the wild young like that and raise them appropriately for them to grow up to be a nice, healthy tortoise. So it takes months and months and months and months of rehabilitation, unfortunately, on that, but that happens regularly. Luckily, once you mentioned education, right, in schools, every time we do an educational program, someone will end up saying, oh my gosh, my friend has a tortoise. So we're like, let's go visit friend. And we get that tortoise out of there. So it's just, it's kind of one at a time. The education is super important because most of the time it's ignorance. And those people don't get arrested or cited or it's not a violation. But when it is, willful and it is nefarious, then those people need to be arrested and investigated and make sure that doesn't happen again. But unfortunately, it's more common than you think. Habitat destruction, that's obviously why Edie and everybody else started Friends of Northport. So you've got a lot of habitat starting to be developed, and we have to protect the corridors. You have to protect the habitat that sustains these animals, or we will no longer have these animals. I don't care what kind of protections we have for them. So this is happening at a high rate. We talked about their sexual maturity and fragmentation. They don't have, that's fine, so they're 20 years old and they're going out and trying to breed, but they can't find mates because they have to cross the road to get over to mates, and then they get killed. So we have to make sure we provide enough land to sustain the animals through corridors for them to go freely without fragmentation. Encinal Take permits. This will answer all your questions, I promise. Basically, they were pay and bury permits. This tortoise is okay. This is actually one of our very first projects. The developer allowed us to come on the property to save the tortoises, but we had to do it while the machines were out there. They would not stop work at all. So we actually found this tortoise unburying herself from the rubble, and she had been hit by a backhoe. So some local doctor did a really nice patch job, and she's living happy forever out in the wild. So she's good to go. Okay, so this is the information on Encinal Take. The high, dry, sandy, well-drained soils that we all talked about throughout the variety of the habitats they live in are the same habitats that what? People want to live in, right? No one wants to build in a swamp. You want to live on high, dry, sandy soil. So in 1991, Encinal Take was adopted as FWC as a tool for mitigation between land that people wanted to buy for development and private land ownership and construction versus the imperiled species that lived on those lands. Someone has to lose. So, and unfortunately it was the tortoise. The foundation of conservation value proposed in the system was that a developer could take tortoises off the site, which meant they could be harmed, killed, buried, in exchange for a mitigation payment. So that money would go to a fund to buy land, to save other tortoises, protect habitat in other places. The basic premise was these tortoises will be sacrificed, but we're gonna save these over here. And then we're gonna restore lands, and we're gonna protect habitat, and we're gonna do everything we can to protect other tortoises. Thanks to a grassroots effort by citizens, activist organizations, FWC ended Take. They realized that they didn't actually intend on Take having this kind of impact. Unfortunately, a lot of tortoises were buried, and the conservation value that they initially planned for it wasn't working out. So they realized the mistake they made and said, no more, we're not doing this anymore, we can't do this anymore, this isn't right for the conservation of the species, so they ended it. And all the previous Take permits, though, because they are non-expiring, those are they're legal binding contracts where a developer paid for that permit, they were all grandfathered in. So all the permits from 1991 to 2007 that developers could buy for that property were actually grandfathered in, so they can still legally bury tortoises today if they have one of those permits.
Just developers?
Landowners, anyone that bought them.
Okay.
Typically it was developers though.
Even if the land changes hands?
Yes, that's a very good question. They can transfer the
Oh, wow.
permit. They cannot, let's say developer A bought land A. So he bought an Encinal Take permit for here. Now he goes buy land B. He can't transfer the permit for land A to land B. But a second developer that comes in to buy land A can have that permit. It just has to be transferred.
And what's the
So-
situation after 2007?
For the
If the land,
species,
yeah, if the land was purchased after 2007.
it doesn't matter when the land was purchased.
Doesn't matter.
Nope. As long as they have that Encinal Take permit that was issued between 1991 and 2007, it's valid into perpetuity. So it doesn't matter who owns it. They cannot execute that permit if another person comes in though. And this is where we are able to save a lot of tortoises because a lot of people don't know this. If they bought, a developer comes in and buys a project that already has an Encinal Take permit on it, and they did not transfer that permit, they do not have the right to legally bury those tortoises. So if they do not get that permit transferred, they do not own that take permit, and they cannot bury those tortoises, they have to relocate them. So sometimes that gives us the needed time, because obviously, you know, two things that are very important is time and money. So we work weekends, holidays, nights, 7 days a week, it doesn't matter, whatever we need to do to meet those construction timelines, because if we don't meet construction timelines, the developers aren't gonna be our partners anymore if we hold up their construction. So what we're able to do with those situations, like, well, you can't do it anyhow, I can't go in and save those tortoises, and you can't build on that land yet because you have to transfer that permit. So sometimes that buys us the time needed to get in there and save them. But that's a very good question.
And how about fences?
Fences on what?
You know, just recently, in my case, the town of Norfolk gave a permit to fence the habitat where the tortoises are.
Oh, okay.
And
yeah.
they know that they are there.
Okay, so
They
they're
can- yeah,
fencing
they
it
fence
to
it.
protect the tortoises?
No, not at all.
Oh,
No,
okay.
they're fencing it so the tortoises will not go around.
Not get out of it?
Yes,
And forage.
and forage, and,
Oh.
and find a mate, as you just explained.
Okay.
Right.
Well, there's
that
a
means
couple-
the fence will prohibit them to
Gotcha.
go out,
Okay.
not to protect them, no.
Okay.
They cannot go out.
Okay, now there's a couple situations with that.
Mhm.
There's temporary exclusion permits. It depends on what the development's going on in the area. Sometimes they'll fence tortoises out or in,
Mhm.
depending on where the construction's gonna be. So
There's
that
no
way,
construction.
there's no
Can
construction.
I
There's no
give you a
construction.
scenario on this?
Yeah.
4 years ago, a neighbor of my friend here, has a double lot.
Uh-huh.
It might even be a triple lot on the other side, I'm not sure. So he's got his building in the middle and he's got the 2 lots on the side.
Gotcha.
The one lot has had the habitats,
Okay.
Very big
numerous burrows.
Okay.
Big one.
When Jarena mentioned to him that he has turtles on his tortoises on his property, within a week bulldozed that area.
Wow, yeah,
With
you
no
have to
reason
call,
whatsoever.
yeah, you have to
And
call
I call-
FWC on
I
that,
called and
yeah.
nothing happened.
Okay, well, I'm gonna give you my contact information at the end. Sometimes there's confusion and sometimes we have great officers in our area, but you know, in every single job, there's some people that don't take the job seriously. So we just need to follow up with them and make sure that they follow up.
So of course there was no reason for the bulldozing, and now he's putting fence around them
Gotcha, okay.
for no reason
Well,
whatsoever.
I will talk to you afterwards about
Okay,
that, so
thank
we
you so
continue
much.
and we will make sure,
Absolutely.
we will
Thank
make
you
sure
so
we get
much.
FWC on that because they do have to come to something like that.
Okay.
Because he has to have a permit, absolutely, to impact any kind of burrow or tortoise, 100%.
Because some of them
Okay.
have returned.
Right, well, that's good, yeah, they would have dug out, unless there's an impervious surface on there, they can dig out, which is very good news.
Yes.
Yes.
How do you find out where these take permits are and
Also a very
listed
good question.
and how many
there-
are still outstanding and?
There's absolutely zero way to tell that, I'll tell you why. They're with relocation permits, so an environmental consultant goes in, they relocate tortoises off the site, not one that has an Encinal Take permit, just a regular site, developer buys land, there's tortoises on it, we're gonna relocate these tortoises. They have to file an after-action report with FWC. So when they did the relocation, how many tortoises, when they went to the recipient site, all of that information has to be confirmed. Unfortunately, since these tortoises, how do I say this nicely? They were not going to be counted because they were considered, they were going to be dead, basically. There was no after-action report because you really didn't know how many tortoises you were burying. So there's no way to actually tell how many truly how many tortoises were buried or killed. Number 2, we know how many permits are out there. We did a sunshine law request, and FWC's been super cooperative and wonderful with our project. So they provided all of us that information. So I have a database that I can
that's what
check.
I'm
So
asking,
absolutely, people text me every day, call me, and I always ask people, you see development going on, give me the name of the development that's coming, and if there's tortoises on there, or if they have a take permit, we can go in there immediately and save them, and we'll work with the developer. I do not take no for an answer, and I've never been told no, and I don't plan on being told no.
Atta girl.
So, we honey badger everybody. There's no reason not to do it. It doesn't cost them anything.
Right.
We always ask for a donation, but it doesn't cost them anything, and we do whatever we have to do to work within the time frames. So there's no reason not to save these tortoises. So yeah, I'll have my contact information at the end, and again, you can contact me anytime. And then we've got that database to look. There's no way to tell, since there were no after-action reports, what permits are still out there that haven't been executed yet. But we're working with FWC now to develop with GIS mapping to kind of look at all these different permits that are out there and look at these Google images and say, oh, there's raw earth here that doesn't have houses on them. So we're gonna go in there and we're gonna work with those developers.
But that's what I'm wondering, from 1991 until 2007, with the rate of development that has been in southwestern Florida, all these developers, Fish and Wildlife must have had some kind of database with all the permits
Oh yeah,
that
that's what I'm
they
saying, I have that
issued.
database
Oh,
from the
okay.
Sunshine State Law, so we have a list of all the
okay.
database. We have a list of all the permits in the database, but there's not, there's identifying information there, but we have to confirm what that information is, because a lot of the information, okay, this is a property called Oak Hammock, and it's north of 95, it's west of this road, it's east of this road, because there's no real addresses. So we have to pull those maps that were originally issued with that permit to confirm, you know, whether that's the correct site. So there's a lot of logistics
But
involved.
they would also be listed under either the developer's name
But that
or
could
the
change 10 times over
Oh, I
since
see.
1991. That's the
Okay.
problem we have sometimes.
Okay.
But I will take, yeah, whatever information you have, I will take all of that, we'll look it up. And worst case scenario, we'll just get an intersection, and FWC is amazing at working with us to try to find those locations if we have no other identifying data or the land's changed hands a million times. We'll figure it out though. We always do, absolutely. So, again, ITPs, they can no longer buy Encinal Take permits as of 2007, but all of the old ones were grandfathered in, and that is what our project does solely, is work off those projects and save those tortoises. So the results of Take, 100% surveys were not required to obtain an ITP, it's actually a 15% survey. The reason I use the Orange County numbers, I'm from the Orange County area, we do a lot of programs in that area. So there's 9,000 tortoises permitted for burial on ITPs alone, just in the county next to me. Over 100,000 tortoises were permitted to be buried since 1990. Now, sometimes we go on a site, and there's supposed to be 19 tortoises, and we find 19 tortoises, we find 17 tortoises. Sometimes we go on a site, we're supposed to find 19 tortoises, and we find over 100 tortoises. So there's no real way to extrapolate that number to get a real, you know, a reality check on what we've done to tortoises in this state. The only thing that we can focus on is save every damn tortoise we can off of these Encinal Take permit sites. And that's what we focus on. Oh, hold on, I forgot about this. Super important. Slow metabolism. We talked about that, about them spending 80% of their time underground, their ability to hibernate, digestion, heal, all these things. So that slow metabolism also is their greatest enemy when they get buried under construction. So you've got a burrow, right? So this angle of a burrow. Get a house put on top of it. Tortoise is trapped inside. For 6 to 12 months, that tortoise is trying to get out, because it takes that long for them to finally succumb to starvation, dehydration, or suffocation, because it takes a very long time for their metabolism to catch up. So when they get hit by cars, it's great because their metabolism is in their favor, and oftentimes they will recover from trauma that you will not believe that no mammal could ever survive. But also when they get buried, it results in them suffering for a very, very, very long period of time. So in addition, not only do those tortoises perish, but all the commensals, so indigo snakes, you know, Florida mice, imperal commensals, non-imperal commensals, venomous snakes, whatever was in that burrow at the time that house got put on top of them, are all dying. So origins of the project, 2005. I'll be fast about this. This is just so you know why we started what we did and why. The Humane Society of the United States at a regional office did a regional newsletter about tortoises being buried by Walmart. And so my reaction was, oh, what the hell? You can't bury an animal alive. This is not right. Looked into it, found out about Encinal Take. So I started calling around. I said, well, you know, why is this? This doesn't seem right to me. I don't see conservation value, and I know I'm being emotional because you shouldn't bury an animal. It's more humane aspect. And I wasn't a biologist. I was an investigator at a sheriff's office. So I was like, maybe there's something I'm missing. So I did everything I could to educate myself. I went to classes. I studied under Ray Ashton. If any of y'all know him, late great Ray Ashton, tortoise biologist. And I just could not get on board with the conservation value of mitigation of Encinal Take at any level. So, but everyone, I was getting dead ends everywhere. I said, I want to save these tortoises. And everyone said, no, this is entrenched. There's conservation value here. And I disagreed. Several people disagreed. So the only one person in the entire state called me back and or took this seriously. And it was Dr. Jennifer Hobgood with HSUS. And she had just gotten on the Go for Tortoise Technical Assistance Group, which is GTAG. It's a stakeholder group. You'll know when there's a management plan, there's a stakeholder group with different stakeholders that are on it that represent different industries, so developers, homeowners, the public, biology, and the tours, of course. So I partnered with HSUS and we came up with a